Hi, I'm Reggie Turner. I'm here with Jim Miller and Terrence Moore. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. Gentlemen, it's good to be back with you again. We're getting close to the end of the year, but we got some interesting topics for us to cover today. And the Herald Mail has started a 6-part series kind of looking at the different sides of downtown Hagerstown in regards to some of the positives and the negatives. Positives in regards to the growth and the expansion that we're seeing. And then on the negative side, we're still seeing issues with drugs and poverty and all the ancillary issues of that. So as of the taping of this show, we have had kind of 3 segments of that. The first one kind of teed up the backdrop of everything. The second segment really honed in on the drug issue and what communities are saying. And then the third segment that was in the Herald Mail today talked more about the business aspect with Greg Snook of Chief, Jim Kerjeval of Greater Hagerstown Committee, and Linder Eversole. So we're starting. The Herald Mail is starting to catch up with the conversations that we've been having.
I was going to say a lot of these topics look very familiar to me.
Yeah, we've been having these conversations for the last 2 years, but it is nice to see that our local newspaper, that's not as local as it has been, to kind of pick up these things for a broader conversation amongst our community. So I'm going to start from the top. The first article from 2 days ago was "From Promise to Disillusionment: The Tricky Nature of Predicting Downtown's Future." And it started with, "Where is downtown Hagerstown going?" Jim, I'm going to just open it up to you and let you kind of give your initial thoughts in regards to where things are and where they're going.
So there are absolutely issues, and there are probably a lot of issues. I take issue with some of our local elected officials in the city government. Significant issues. That said, I think some very smart minds in this community that have a pretty good track record of knowing where to invest are investing in downtown. And I think a renaissance for that community is going to approach. Now, what could sidetrack that? All of the issues that you have seen in this Herald Mail series. I think another thing that could sidetrack that is potentially a significant economic downturn. So, we're not out of the woods yet, but we have some, in my view at least, we have some fairly significant wins to talk about. Not to say that there's not negatives.
Right.
I'm hoping that, we got 2 years till the next city election, and I'm hoping that election will have consequences. I won't get into who or why or where, but I don't know that I believe that all of the elected officials are making the best decisions, in my view.
Now,
can I just say one other thing?
Shoot it.
To the Herald Mail, if you're watching the show, if somebody from the city calls and wants a copy of your newspaper like they wanted a copy of our last show, it's okay.
Fair point. Terrence, I'll tee this up to you. I think, though, if we look at the major things that are happening in the city, many of them, they're not led by the government. And I don't see that as a bad thing, right? Because you need the private sector
The government
making the investment.
cannot fix this.
Absolutely.
Cannot fix that. Even if everybody in the city said the government's doing the best job that they could possibly do,
right,
there's no way the government can fix all this. And we can't afford for them to fix all this, even if they could.
Because we would consider,
and it bothers me not only in the city of Hagerstown, but in any municipality, that when something good happens, it's always the private investor. When something bad happens, it's always the government. And Bob Brucci, who used to sit on this show, used to talk about, they talk about a murder in Hagerstown. Well, it was not in Hagerstown proper. It was in the outskirts. Yes, it was a Hagerstown zip code, but it was not technically in the city.
Right.
And I think some of the bad things that happen outside of the city get attributed to the city, even though they're really not in the city.
Yeah, but it's where the concentration of population is in the county, correct?
Yeah.
So it's going to draw the eyes, it's going to draw the attention. And the only reason that we see these articles happening now is because a lot of this started to play out on social media and came to the doorstep of the city as people, as it's mentioned in the article, start showing up to city council meetings and voicing their concerns as well. And I agree. I don't believe this is something that the government can fix, but it can be something that the government's policies can contribute to. And it is the representatives that are elected as government officials to be the project managers, to say the least, to make sure that the business community partners with the government employees, that partners with the nonprofits, that partners with the citizens, to make sure that communication happens and there's some unity and transparency in what is going on to drive things forward. So I think the conflict is what really holds a lot of the progress back. Even though one area may be working stronger in one direction, if it's not working collectively amongst the constituents as well as the government, as well even the business community who are also constituents, it's just going to be pulling apart what can be really moving forward. And I think that's what it is. I think it's more of a slowdown to the progression versus stopping it or projecting it forward.
I agree with what you're saying, and one of the things that I've seen, and you can watch city council meetings and see this, and you can see the evolution of it over the past year, and it's kind of speeded up. One of the issues that I have with the city is that when you talk about the nonprofits and their role and how they can support some of the ills and things that are in the community, our city government tends to have the propensity to pick and choose which nonprofits they like and which they don't like. We talked a lot.
But is that based on outcomes?
No.
I
believe it's based on personalities many times and not outcomes or perceived allies when it comes to what they were looking for. We talked a lot about goodwill and how goodwill was being propped up. But we've seen in recent times, that same city council attacking nonprofits that serve a significant role in the community. And I think it does a disservice to the community as a whole, especially when most of these nonprofits are working with virtually volunteers and little paid staff. And I just don't think it's the tone and tenor that the government should be taking in regards to those types of organizations.
And I would say with that, a lot of that also is understanding and influence, right?
Yes.
I think you talk about some of the larger nonprofits, and I say this because I served on boards of small nonprofits and large nonprofits. The understanding of how to partner and work with government, how to reach out to government officials, how to be present, how to ask for dollars, how to influence support differs from a small nonprofit than a larger nonprofit that has the tools, the resources,
yes,
and the staffing to really partner with that. So I think in some of those cases, it's less of the government just selecting who they want to work with, but who it may be a little easier to work with because of the staff and the relationships and the partnership and handing off some of those business responsibilities and coming to the table in some ways. I'm not saying that there's no preferential treatment at all, but I'm saying that you wouldn't want to prefer to work with a larger organization if it's going to ease some of your responsibility.
I'm going to make a distinction there. I don't know that I think I'd prefer to work. And for the record, I have no hard data to suggest that there's any favoritism or anything else among city government employees or city elected officials for a given nonprofit over the other. I've heard them involved with numerous nonprofits in the area, some large, some small, some mid-size. I think the key there at some level is understand, whether you're small or large, is understanding what to ask, how to ask,
exactly,
and what the options are. And with all due respect to our nonprofit community, and we have an expansive nonprofit community, not-for-profit community in our town, in our county, and it's great. But I'm not sure they all know what they should be asking for and I'm not sure that they asked the wrong question, and the city, or not just the city, but the county or other municipalities don't understand it, and maybe they're busy enough that they don't take the opportunity to teach these nonprofits what they need to ask, and so the nonprofit goes away upset. And
that's exactly what I'm saying, because you know what to ask when you're a larger organization. You have the staffing capacity to do that.
Or you have someone, there are smaller nonprofits that have people that have experience with other nonprofits.
Or proximity to the people in power.
Yeah.
That's where it looks like preferential treatment. And it happens in all businesses.
Do you think that when the former treasurer of the City of Hagerstown retired and got on some of the boards of these smaller nonprofits, that didn't help them get more attention because he knew the questions to ask, he knew what the available options were,
and he knows who to pick up the phone and call.
Exactly.
Right, and that's who you prefer to work with.
Right, and I can't blame city government for not responding to a request or a need that is either not communicated or communicated improperly.
See, I agree with that, and that's exactly what I was saying as far as it not all being preferential, but it is, every one of those nonprofits are businesses, and you have to allow access and equity at the same time. So I do hold them accountable for that. As far as educating nonprofits, knowing that even in this county alone, we have 600-700 nonprofits in this county alone, and I don't know exactly how many in the city. It should be some kind of effort to educate and ensure the doors are open for all nonprofits to come through. Now, those who don't take advantage of those things, I get it. And I'm not just talking about putting a posting out on social media or on your webpage. There has to be some reaching out, education, and involvement in doing so. So that's where I hold them accountable for. But until that's there, you can't hold them accountable for who actually walks through the door.
Well, and the other thing that I would say, and this might be a little controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that in my view, one of the primary responsibilities of, you call it city government, county government, state government, federal government, is not to support nonprofits. The fact that not-for-profits exist, they exist to replace government services or to augment government services. And their funding, at least in the initial stages, was by and large by private donation. Now, all of a sudden, we've started funding all of these not-for-profits.
Right.
At the county level, we do it through the gambling tax.
The gaming commission.
And that's a great method. The city doesn't have that opportunity, but the city still does a lot of work with a lot of not-for-profits. So, I think, frankly, that there's limitations there, and that the expectation is, I'm assuming here, that the expectation is that you'll bring information about what you need, why you need, what the outcomes are going to be from what you're asking for from the city. I think that's a perfectly logical and reasonable expectation on the part of city government.
It is, until you say, when homelessness and drug abuse and everything comes up, comments about nonprofits not stepping up or doing enough.
Yeah.
You can't have it both ways.
Now, who says that? The government?
There's been
criticism
about the nonprofits, and I believe that's what I'm saying. They have to work hand in hand.
But at some point, and this may not be the case anymore, but at some point we had people coming into the community, homeless people coming into the community because they knew they would get services here. So we don't want to be an attraction.
That's not city government's decision. That's federal aid, state aid that may make it easier in a smaller town. I can tell you, coming from a big city, giving government services is an all-day exhausting effort to get those services. When you come into a smaller town, it's a bus ride. It's a couple of hours. It's walking in and not standing on lines. So yes, access is extremely easier when you talk about the access to those services. But I think we're really talking about partnership and working together in ways that government can't even afford really to help out. No one donates money to the government. All right. So, but they will donate to a nonprofit. We always look at government taxing us and taking money from us that we have to give them, versus nonprofits who go into the community and have people who are philanthropists really give and support in ways that if the government asks for those same dollars, they will never get. So I think that's why there needs to be a relationship and a partnership and access and education, even though when you're not required to do it, but it is in your best interest, in the best interest of your constituents, especially dealing with a lot of these basic needs, drug and housing issues, that these nonprofits are better suited to handle and can be more flexible and move in a way that most governments can't. And I'm not just talking about this city. We can expand that out to how government acts in general. And you talk about the money that's been given in grants to nonprofits. I'm scared because a lot of these nonprofits in the next year won't exist. And if the problems haven't been resolved with all the funding given to them now, what's going to happen when this funding dries up?
Right.
Or we get into a recession and people stop donating their money. So they're not getting money from government grants, which is a very competitive process for nonprofits, and people are less likely to donate, and the government may not be perfectly suited to address some of these issues. The issues don't go away.
You're right. I want to key in something you said just there. The grants from the government, I think at all levels, as far as I know, is a process. It is a defined process. Mm-hmm. So again, I would hope, I would expect that they are making fact-based decisions on what to do. Now, does knowing who to call help? Yes, it absolutely does. Not just in not-for-profit communities, in anything you can ever think of.
Right.
How many people do you know that have gotten hired to jobs because they knew someone and they could vouch for them? Yep. Not that they're given special treatment, but they say, this guy does good work.
It's
okay,
all
I
about
want him.
relationships.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely. Happens in all like lines of business. It does. And like going back to what I said, especially in a small town, there's proximity, right? It's easy for you to sit in a restaurant and be, a table away from an elected official and have that access when you have such a small populated community, or befriend or know somebody who knows somebody because you went to high school, you went to college, or you worked with each other. So the proximity for you when you start a nonprofit or a business to be able to have contact with an elected official is a lot easier in this community, but it's also a lot easier to piss one of them off. So it works both ways. I'm just
Well, nobody at this table would ever do that.
No, not at all. Well, let's talk about some of the good that came out of the first article.
Well, actually, before we get off that, can I provide a theory that I have?
Is this breaking news?
No, it's not. Somebody might break me for saying no. That's not true. I think that this is a situation where if you build it, they will come, and if you build it, they will leave. That is to say, that the more feet on the street we get in downtown Hagerstown, at shops, at restaurants, at businesses, at whatever, the less opportunity, because the people that are doing the bad stuff don't want to be in the limelight. They want to do it where there's nobody else, and they can do their drug transactions or whatever it is they're doing without being noticed.
The balancing act is getting people to have the confidence.
But see,
to
I
do
think
it in the midst of.
and that is one of the things where I think, whether it was intentionally or by accident, USMH, Barbara Ingram School for the Arts,
right.
Some of these restaurants that are catching on downtown, we are, and I've said this before on this show, we are building a generation of individuals who's not afraid to go downtown. And you can see it. The vast majority of Facebook posts I see about downtown Hagerstown are, oh, it's crap, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. And then every once in a while, you'll get one of these young people come in, because the young people aren't on Facebook. They're like, yeah, no, it's not. I go to school down there. I walk down there from USMH to my car in the parking deck without issue.
The growth that the city needs to be is it not just so concentrated, right in the core, right?
But
there needs to be more outside of the core.
Okay, I'll buy that, but I think the core is the place to start. And I think the core has the architecture. I think the core has the opportunity for, if you look at where some of the bad stuff is, would you agree?
Well, the core's been doing well, right? Obviously pre-COVID, you really started to see an energy downtown. Once the Maryland Theater was done in late 19,
well, and you saw
in that period.
We saw an energy back in the 2007 time frame. I forget the developer's name, but he did a lot of work downtown. And then the recession came through, huge recession, one of the worst in my lifetime.
Dimming.
Yeah, Deming.
Yep.
And
I think he was on the forefront. He was making those investments. He was purchasing those buildings.
and
But
he didn't have the wherewithal to ride through the.
which most people did,
Right.
with the
But
economic.
now
yeah.
look at the people that are investing. You've got the Don Bowmans. You've got a lot of big names that are getting into either the stadium, or with Don Bowman and the
Right.
former.
Well, this time is different though, right? Because of the influx of money that you have coming from the state level, and
It is.
one of the things that Greg Snook said last week when we were at the Convention Visitors Bureau's annual meeting was all of the outside interest that's coming just because of the stadium coming alone.
Right.
You know, what he spoke of was that not only is he hearing from developers that specialize in doing projects around sports facilities, but they've also heard from 2 Major League Baseball teams.
And I say this too, going back to what you mentioned earlier, Jim. The investment that some of the most successful businesses are having downtown is a generational investment. They're not investing in the age group from 30 to 50. You know, they are getting them earlier, which was a big issue in the community when you had the brain drain, when you had a lot of youth that couldn't wait to get out of town and move away. You mentioned earlier as well, if you build it, they will leave. When you first said that, my mind didn't immediately go to the people doing the drug sales and you're also talking about some people who liked a quiet, quaint community. You're going to have some of those who may just decide to migrate away as well. Everybody's not happy with the influx of business and the bustling that's going to happen downtown. There is some of the population,
The stadium, the noise,
right,
the fireworks, those
right.
concerns.
There is
that
some
you're
of those
Yeah.
that's going to come up as well that has to be addressed and has to be mitigated. And
Well, especially in the stadium area. I mean, I know there's a fair amount of residential rentals in town, but the stadium area is where I think the next major change is going to be in terms of the impact on the residents around the area.
Right.
But that's another point, what you mentioned about investing a little bit more outside of the core. You have to have people living in your core. You have to have more of those apartments, those economically sound and affordable apartments that people can live in and start their lives. Maybe a 1 and 2 bedroom where people get up and they live and they breathe in the downtown area. People come and visit them in the downtown area. Apartments above coffee shops and things like that, in apartment buildings, and affordable housing or cost-effective housing for a generation that doesn't want to buy homes right now. This new generation, we listened to The Economist recently, and we've been reading articles that this generation wants to live on experiences. They want to buy their first home in their late 30s or early 30s versus right out of high school investing and purchasing their first home. So where are they going to live until then, especially when being priced out of the home market so quickly right now?
Well, that's
And
why
that was one of the things that Greg Snook said in this series was that our home ownership rates in the city of Hagerstown is roughly about 40%. To continue to be on a path of success, it needs to be north of 60. But when you walk around the city and you look at different pockets, it's even worse.
it is.
For instance, the most recent asset mapping study done in the Jonathan Street community, home ownership there is only 14%. So part of what I'm saying is the growth needs to expand. Like, the core is a great place to start, but we could argue that core's rebirth really started with the investment that Governor Hogan made in Barbara Ingram and the Maryland Theater. When is that growth going to expand? Because you're going to have to expand to these other areas in regards to home ownership, because it's not all going to be downtown. There's not many opportunities to own a home in the core.
Not right now.
Yeah, and you got to build on, just like a business. You got to develop your own as well as recruit talent as well. And that's the same thing. We can't get so focused on we build it and they'll come into the community and wealth is going to gravitate in if we build these jobs. But what about the developing of wealth and education here when we have a great educational system here? You know, how do we get people in that path to home ownership and still be contributing to the economy? Because you're going to have some individuals and families that are of 20 and 30-year-olds that are going to be making a decent income but aren't going to be able to afford a home. So they're going to be renting.
Well, that's exactly right. And that to your point of the downtown rentals, do you think that the investment that's happening in the stadium, the investment that's happened in the Maryland Theater, the other investment that we see these business leaders that we're talking about making, do you think that will trickle down to the point where the landlords will say, hey, this is getting to be a pretty good place. If I spend $100,000 in fixing up my apartments, I can get $200,000 back over 10 or 15 years. I think that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, the one thing that this the article speaks to is, you know, there's a 45% increase in regards to kind of the sales. So you are starting to see property values go up. So there is more equity there for.
Well, and property values have gone up. Property values, I have an issue putting too much weight on that particular statistic just because look at what's happened to property values in the last 2 years.
Well, the weight that you put on it is it gives the owners of these properties more flexibility for financing to either purchase others or improve.
Except for now we've got
properties.
a 7.5% interest rate hurdle that we have to get over.
But that's not normally a hurdle because you always have the ability to go in and refinance, right? I mean, it may be a hurdle for a period of time but obviously if the numbers work in regards to what you're trying to do, you can always go in and refinance and make that a better situation.
But inflated property value, you can't refinance your principal. You can't get your principal to go any further down.
Exactly.
Until you can have a regulated price that you're purchasing at where you know that you're going to be able to build equity upon and not be, you know, working your way back to what it truly is over the next 5 or 10 years, it's not going to really help out.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, we've covered this a bit. I want to come back and talk about some of the bright spots and the projects that are happening downtown. But let's hold right here and come back after the break and do that. Stay with us. We'll have more of downtown revitalization talk after the break. Welcome back to the show. Gentlemen, let's jump right back in regards to some of the city revitalization. Let's talk about a little bit of the positive. I teased this before, but one of the things the first article talked about was a 45% increase in property sale prices over 5 years, but obviously that's just been the trend, right, nationally in regards to that. That's not saying anything specific in regards to our community, I don't feel. But here's kind of some of the projects on tap. So, you know, we have talked about many of these over the past year or two, but, you know, the city has planned a $20 million field house that they would like to put over by Municipal Stadium. I mean, obviously at this point today, as I'm aware, they don't have the financing to complete that project. I know that they have that as a priority going back to Annapolis, so we'll see how that shakes out. I know that Senator Quarterman was able to get them a little bit of a down payment in regards to that, but I don't know how much that really moves the needle in regards to that project. We have the $9 million parking deck that's supposed to accompany the stadium. That I believe the city is on the hook for that parking deck that is to come.
Which can do nothing but help if we start getting more businesses downtown.
Right.
You know?
And I believe that parking deck is an extra because I believe when the study was completed, there would be enough parking for the stadium. Like, I don't believe it was going to have to be required, but that project is still on tap. So
that's in the old Hagerstown Trust parking lot, right? Is that true?
It says along Antietam Street.
Yeah, along Antietam Street. Yeah, I think that's the old. If it's where it is, I think it is. It's the flat parking lot now that used to be used by Hagerstown Trust employees or Columbia Bank. Okay. It may still be. But think about it that in terms of just access to the city. You could go right up the back alley there and out right into the city center. You can go to the Maryland Theater. You can go, I mean, that could have a lot of utility in my view.
And those two projects are ones that are planned. So there hasn't, other than the old stadium being demolished, and knowing that additional parking may be needed, I don't think there has been any really pure actions or allocation of really funds to put towards those projects as of yet. But I think a lot of them are also depending on what comes out of some of the other projects you're going to mention here.
Right. They've mentioned the cultural trail here. There wasn't a dollar amount put to that, but you have the cultural trail.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I was initially very much opposed to that, and I still don't like some of the lights they put up, but that's just personal preference. But I feel like that's a good thing. When I drive through downtown, I'm amazed at how many people are on that and use that, especially on the weekends.
And call that out to something here that I don't believe I've seen in this article. We had the Clara Barton statue that's going to be going up as well.
And that's going to be going up at the park, in the park?
It's going to be going up around the circle by the museum.
Okay.
But it's going to be part of the trail.
Yes.
Right? And let's not talk about the project the museum is doing.
Their expansion.
Right.
Big time.
The Museum of Fine Arts is doing a huge expansion and getting more into education and the arts as well, which isn't included in here. But I would say that's part of the larger work that's going to be pulling that trail a little bit more into the Museum of Fine Arts, because I think it's always been a disconnect from where the trail kind of drops off at, with the expectation that it really connects City Park and the Museum of Fine Arts. So to have that statue as well as the expansion happening there, all that's also going to be hopefully pulling more of a from the south end of Hagerstown into the downtown area as well.
Right.
It's amazing, and you said the City Park, and I constantly forget about that, but you never hear anybody say anything bad about the City Park.
It's a beautiful park.
It is. I mean,
Right.
How many other communities do you think have a park of that quality in a town of this size?
In a museum.
And a museum,
to anchor it, right?
And the Maryland Theater, and
Right.
the Maryland Symphony, and
Right.
there's some real assets here.
And something else I didn't see here, I know it's not immediate downtown, but there's work going to happening at the airport as well, right? Mm-hmm. So that brings in tourism and travelers from a larger surface area in the country that may want to be coming in here and spending time in Washington County.
Well, I mean, let's step away from the article a little bit and kind of work from the north end back over, right? So around Pennsylvania Avenue, we have the multi-million-dollar building of the Boys and Girls Club facility.
Right.
Right? Working your way back towards the core, you have the proposed Dolman Black Heritage Museum, which is a $23 million proposal. That's another thing, but you have that. You have the multi-million-dollar renovation of the Robert W. Johnson Center that's about to kick off. And then right down the street, which is included in this article, you have the proposed brewery that's going to be at the farmers market. So even when you get outside the core, like, you're still talking about large investment dollars that are either proposed or already committed to kind of reshaping things. And that was part of the point that I was trying to make is, it is important for those projects to be successful to, number one, raise property values in some of the areas where they may be depressed, and give those areas more opportunity at home ownership. Because when you start to work out those where you're seeing more of the blighted homes, the vacant lots, and these projects are going to, number one, help increase property values for homeowners, so that when the elders pass away, many of these properties won't be a burden, it'll be an asset.
Right.
And there will be more encouragement from some of these outside companies and organizations that own property and homes in this community to kind of upkeep them.
And I'll say, what people don't want to probably say it either is the depreciation of property makes outside recruitment more appetizer.
Yes.
Right? So though you hear about the homelessness and the drugs and some of those things that are going on, those also impact property values, schools, everything. Those also are drivers of making decisions. And when those property values are low, people buy cheap with the expectation that it'll be a turnaround. So I'm not surprised that phone calls are coming in and people having interest of, because once these shovels hit the ground and a lot of this work start, and that those property values, those blighted homes, those empty lots, the cost to demolish and restore or build new homes on there. And then let's also talking about the cost of labor and construction costs start to go down as well. It becomes real appetizing for somebody to come in on the cheap and purchase some of these properties.
Right. You know, when we start looking at the core, we also mentioned in here we have Don Bowman's restoration of the Masonic Temple.
Right. Which was a beautiful building.
Yes.
Is a beautiful building.
Yes.
You know, you have that happening there on South Potomac Street. Also, you have the renovation that's been going on of the Alexander House, which is a $30 million project.
The new Masonic Temple that of the Masons that moved out of the old temple,
yes,
they had a multi-million-dollar renovation of that building, which was the old, I believe, the VFW, and it's a huge renovation that they put in there, and it's a beautiful building as well that they've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I agree. I believe the smartest thing that's happening, if you look at it and you kind of put a map down and you start plotting, and it'd be a great visual to show, plotting all these projects that are happening. One, it's pulling the populations from the outside of town into the core. Right. Mm-hmm. So when you start interacting, doing family, or picking your kids up from Boys and Girls Club, or going down to the community center, the Robert W. Johnson Community Center, or going downtown for a cup of coffee at Gannon, or you decide to take a walk up down the cultural trail up to the museum, it connects the community in a way that really pulls people from some of the things that they would do only on the South End or only on the North End, and make them want to bring their dollars, families, and time to the core of the community.
You're adding more amenities and more opportunities for entertainment throughout the city.
Well, and getting back to the whole notion of the fact that the city can't fix this alone. Right. No city can, not our city. No city can do that.
Agreed.
Right.
What the city can do is a couple of things. Number one, they can remove barriers.
Yes.
And number two, and this may be the most important part, they can connect dots. And I will use the cultural trail as a dot connecting example, right? It's connecting these businesses, these entities, these assets in our community to allow people to more easily get to them and really explore the community.
I say this to any elected official: you got to have tough skin, right? People don't see the benefit of these things immediately, and they don't see it in their lives. Right. They just see these large dollars, $1 million here, 90 million, 70 million, 5 million, 10 million, and then they go, "I'm just trying to survive every day. What is in it for me?" So there's some PR that has to come through the elected officials to really make it tangible for people to understand what this investment means for them. Even though they kick, scream, and may have questions about it, attack it, find the time, going back to educating the community and having the tough skin to stand in the gap right now between the business community who are investing, who have the dollars to do so, your nonprofits who are trying to help resolve some of the blight in our lives, in our community. And I know it's not an easy job. I know it's not easy, but you can't swing at every pitch. And you got to kind of turn the other cheek sometime and stand there and make sure you're educated. And don't educate in a way where you're telling everybody everything is great. People want to be heard and understood, and people want to know that you understand why they're frustrated and why they're scared and why they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel that you keep celebrating. So that's what some of the elected officials can be as representatives to the constituents.
And Greg Snook spoke to that. One of the things he said that could derail it or slow the movement is, that spirit of working together in partnership if that doesn't continue to build, because I've heard it in many different rooms that I've been in. There's a frustration in the business community that's here. Mm-hmm. And some of that needs to be worked on and resolved and better, because the thing is the city is running out one of the biggest tools that they've had. That's the money that's been falling from the sky from the federal government, right? That tool is almost empty in regards to that. So I just think that there needs to be a shift, and I would hope that a part of what they pay for with this new marketing strategy is to address some of those types of issues.
Right, and that's a lot of surface stuff. Like it's the behind the scenes
Right.
conversations, sitting down, showing a united front, not having people or the community pick and choose sides of who's right, who's wrong, who they like and who they don't. And you know, there is another influx of money coming in, whether or not it got here or not, because you had the opioid lawsuit that the
Yes.
city joined. So they have a few $1 million that are coming down the pipeline. How they use that money and what they put that money to, we still haven't, I haven't heard it, so I don't want to speak for everyone, but I haven't heard what the plan to distribute that money, how that's going to be a reinvestment in the community and possibly addressing some of the issues that we're having with mental health, with addiction, homelessness, and some of those things that are impacting the community.
And I think that's going to, you bring up a good point, and I think one of the next big issues on the horizon is the 24-hour crisis center and where will it go? That's going to be an issue, because if you look at the one article, obviously the mayor supports a crisis center in the city of Hagerstown. I don't believe Quarterman's interest is lined up there. I know that there's been interest in the county in doing so. I believe Meredith was on board in regards to looking at that. I believe the mayor wants it downtown. So I see that as kind of being an issue, because I think you have to be very careful centralizing all of your social services
in your areas of development.
in your areas of development. You know, one of the things that I know that was floated out there was kind of making a, what are we going to call it, a nonprofit mall or social services mall in the Mola Oregon building, and you know, right on the outskirts of the Johnson Street community. And you know, the contention that I would have if that proposal is still on the table is, how does a community rebuild itself and become a part of the middle class when you're centralizing all the social services in it? You know, that would be a concern. So I'm interested to see where these conversations are going to go in regards to, you know, the social service mall concept that they have, and also this 24-hour crisis center.
But all that stuff is needed, and so I agree with you. I agree that it has to be some strategic planning around that. I don't believe that location is ideal, but it is a need, right? And I do understand putting it out too far away from the core creates accessibility options of how do you get to those locations as well. And maybe you address accessibility versus addressing relocating the whole facility altogether. I don't know what the answer is there,
Right.
but again, it goes back to, if you have those partners, like you said, with a Senator Quarterman and Meredith and others, that's a great time to come to the table and really strategize and plan together and not work in opposition.
I think it's always a benefit, though, when private organizations want to step up and support that, right? Because what that says to me, that's less burden on the taxpayer.
And you see the proposed budget, there's a focus on healthcare that was at least proposed by exiting Governor Hogan. And I wouldn't be surprised if Governor-elect Moore decides to really pick up the mantle, especially what we've seen coming out of COVID.
You know, the other thing we have to look at is that the median income in Washington County, Maryland is about $63,000 a year. That's a median household income. The median household income in Hagerstown is $43,000 or
Yes.
$42,000 a year,
Yes,
somewhere in that range. That's a significant difference.
yes.
And
there's pockets of the city where it's significantly less than that.
there are, absolutely, because
The
that's
study
the
that-
average.
that I've shared
And that,
with
you know,
right.
and you look at the census tracts within the city of Hagerstown, some are significantly more than that, some are significantly
Right.
less. So, you know, that's a problem, especially these days with inflation and all of the things that we're facing, not only today, but into the future.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? The closer you get to the core, the poorer it is.
Which is usually the strategy for most gentrification and revitalization.
Yeah.
Is because, again,
You devalue it, and then you come in and you scoop it up, and you.
and I always say, you want to look at economy, follow the Walmarts, right? Think about how many Walmarts we have in a concentrated area right now. Talking about some of the incomes, household incomes, and where people want to get the most bang for their dollar. Which I understand that, but there's also a stress that's being placed on small business owners. I can't compete with a big box store.
Right.
And you can't
Run them out of business.
Right, and what are you going to put downtown? Hopefully, I believe it'd be great to see some kind of large retailer eventually come downtown, but I think ideally it's going to be supported by small business owners. And people are going to go where their dollar takes them. And that's going to be hard to bring it downtown when you have to compete with some of the things on the outskirts.
Well, when you say Walmart, the one thing that I think of is that, this food desert situation within the city has been a conversation for several years now, right? We know that Goodwill has been in partnership with Meritus in regards to kind of bringing that project to fruition. I don't believe we've heard much about that project and where it stands this year.
No.
In regards to where that sits. And is that going to be a solution that's going to be appropriate for the entire city?
Well, and I can tell you from my perspective, I don't think that will ever work. With all due respect, grocery stores are way too lean on profits. When you say offer a discount, and this was many moons ago, but when I worked in a grocery store in college, some of the margins were 1%, 2%, 3%. Not much to discount there.
Right.
And we've seen some movement as well. We've seen a grocery store like Lidl's that came a little closer to the downtown area that's there now.
And then you kind of have the penny marts that are kind of standing in the gap.
But then we lost the farmers market of those
Yes.
those for those who depended on that. The days they were open as well to go in there for any kind of fresh fruits and vegetables. And I think that's when you talk about the food desert. It's not just being able to walk into a large grocery store. It's also about having access to healthier food choices,
Right.
which also impacts. And right now we have a Go for Bold campaign that's really pushing for us to lose 1 million pounds as a community. And that's not being done unless we make better choices in our diet,
Right.
in our lives, in our social networks. And those are the things that really need to be addressed. And that's why, especially having such a large farmer and rural community on the outskirts of the downtown and the county area, I struggle to see where there's not a pathway to get some of that pumped into our downtown. And it doesn't have to be a huge grocery store. It could be a fruit stand, a fish market. Some of the smaller things that I see in more urban areas that really take advantage of smaller spaces instead of making a large grocery store.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I feel like this year we really lost our farmers market, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because my wife would go to the University Plaza and there would really be no one there. Once they relocated them to that solution really didn't work.
Well, you got weather restrictions that come into play when you go from
Absolutely.
indoor space to outdoor space. And I think a lot of the ties to the farmer markets was also a little nostalgic.
Nostalgic, yeah.
Yeah, as well. But I think it could be replicated in a business model with some of the smaller businesses with some support.
Yeah. Yeah. So, gentlemen, with all that we know, optimistic or pessimistic?
Optimistic.
Optimistic.
Okay. Optimistic.
Okay.
What are you most optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the volume of interest. I think that's going to be good for us. I'm optimistic about the things that we've already done. I'm optimistic about what I mentioned before, the new population from Barbara Ingram School for the Arts and from visitors to the Maryland Theater, the expanded Maryland Theater, and from the USMH, that they're going to become more comfortable and they're going to realize that this is not a bad place to be. I'm optimistic that, and I don't necessarily disagree with the City of Hagerstown posting all of we did 1,600 calls last week, because at some level I think that people can spin that as a negative, not as a positive, but I understand what they're trying to do. But I think that realistically, while the police have not solved all of the problems, they are trying.
Yeah, I would say I'm optimistic because I think leadership has diversified in a way that I haven't seen in 18 years that I've been here.
Leadership of what leadership?
Leadership, period. In the business community, more nonprofit, it's just people really stepping up and being engaged. I think it's the torch is being passed on, and it's the most diverse leadership. While you still have some of the anchored leaders who have invested and put money in, and at the same time it's happening. I don't see the gap in leadership happening that you may see in some areas where the old guard kind of retires, goes away, or unfortunately passes away, and then you're looking for someone to step in the gap. So I think there's organizations like Leadership Washington County, the Greater Hagerstown Committee, and nonprofits, and just that are really engaged in keeping leadership up and aware of what's going on. And also, I think we have all the right puzzle pieces on the table.
Right. And you talked about a lot of them, Jim, like all the amenities that we take for granted that we have in such a small community that make us unique. I agree. I'm optimistic. And for me, I know we've talked a lot about the city, but there's a lot of things that are happening in the county that are going to be positive effects for the city. The medical school.
Right.
The Hitachi plant. I mean, all of those things are going to be net positives for the city. I know that the case study that was done in regards to the medical school, I believe it was in Alabama that they compared it to, that medical school brought in a net $300 million to the local GDP over 10 years. So think about what that's going to do to our community, how it's going to diversify pretty much everything, right? Our population is going to start to look totally different. Starting in kind of, it is now, our population is changing, but in 2025, if you think about where we're going to be, once you have your first class of medical school students starting, and with all the high-tech manufacturing jobs that are going to be here. But from a selfish standpoint, I grew up in Appomattox, Virginia, so I grew up with baseball. And notwithstanding location and what it may do to other folks, I just remember the richness of baseball and what it provided to my life as a kid. So for me, working downtown in Hagerstown, I cannot wait to 2024 being able to walk down the hill with my son, maybe stop at the doghouse, get a hot dog, and walk down the hill to go see a baseball game, because those were the type of things that my father did with me, and I'm going to get the opportunity to do that with my son. So I'm like super excited.
And it's not just a baseball stadium.
Right.
There's other events. I hope live music, concerts. That's what I'm kind of looking forward to as well there.
Yeah.
But just to add to this, timing can't be more perfect if we start to execute now. We're not in a silo. The whole country is suffering and going through things right now, while this community is in a resurgence, while others are still reeling from everything that happened post-COVID. If we can push forward now and then ride the wave of what's to come after we come out of recovery, maybe in 24 and 25, after our mild recession period that we're going to have in next year or so.
Are you on? Wait a minute.
That's just around time frame. It's going to be a tough recession. Winter's still coming, but it's not going to be a long, drawn out winter. So I'm just saying, but it's going to happen while we try to correct ourselves and everything there. But to come out of that, to be positioned where we're at now with the investments that are already tied to this community, we can only win if we get out our own way.
Yeah.
Well, and we can only win. We need to get more than our fair share. We need to build our base of people that support the community, not just the people that support it by building businesses, but we need to get feet on the street. And that's something that Bob Brucci has been saying for 15 years or more. And I agree with him on that.
Yep.
100%.
Feet on the street, butts in the seats.
Butts in the seats.
we still got to fill that theater and that stadium.
So I think you did give breaking news, Terrence, because you have backed. There was a little light on the winter is coming. It feels like you stepped off of that just a little bit on the recession.
No. The recession is here. Right now it's just not as cold as it's about to get.
Okay.
And when we get into the next year, and you can see it right now, it's just unfortunately, concentrated of wealth is very top heavy right now. But the people who are not bringing in those salaries are already feeling this recession right now, and they're going to feel it more so coming into this next year. Just the central bank is playing around with some things.
You still there? You still there? Winter's coming. Winter
is coming.
You still for the hardcore winter?
Yeah.
All right.
Unless you're Walter Cronkite Turner.
Listen, Cronkite Turner says, I'm still mildly optimistic that we're going to weather this thing and we're going to skate on the radar. But the good thing for us as a community, we have committed investments that are coming regardless
Exactly.
of what those economic conditions are. Like those dollars are already committed. So I think that'll help buoy us as a community to kind of weather through it.
100%.
Great.
All right. Excellent. Well, that is all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, join us again next week for another episode of The Flip Side.